Thanks everyone for coming. This is going to be a lot of fun. My name is Melinda Jean Stafford and I'm a beekeeper, and I'm a beekeeper in a couple of capacities. And I talked with a lot of you last week because you were at the honey harvest presentation. But I have a couple of my own hives at home that I manage. They're the Langstroth style hives, so they're 10 frames and they're the boxes that you can keep adding on. Those are the types of hives that I run. And then I'm also the advisor of the Boise State Bee Team, which is our beekeeping club on campus. And they manage 4 hives that are on the roof of our student union building on campus. And so that's a lot of fun to work with those students as well. And I'm a beekeeper for a lot of different reasons. It's a great hobby. I enjoy working with the bees. I like honey and I like to harvest honey. But beeswax is a lot of fun. It's a wonderful, beautiful commodity that can be used for a ton of different things. And so today's class is going to be all about what you can do with beeswax. And I am by no means an expert on how to make every craft with beeswax possible, but I have made a few, and so I can give some tips and tricks on those items and definitely some references on some of the other craft ideas that you may be interested in. So welcome to Beeswax Crafting. So this is going to be our agenda for today. Today we're going to be talking about a lot of different things, but step one is we're going to start making the craft that I'm making live today, which is a hand cream. And I saw that someone wrote down the question of what's a good hand cream recipe. And this is a good hand cream recipe that we're going to be making today. It is on the oily side, so it's more of like a cuticle cream, or really good for really dry spots like elbows and knees. It's not a lotion by any means, so it is definitely a hand cream. And it's not terribly different than the one that I have here, which is one that the bee team makes at Boise State. And it's a hand cream that is lavender scented. So if any of you want to come check these out after the class, you're welcome to open them up and smell them and try them out. So the craft that we're going to be making is very similar to that. And next, after we start mixing those ingredients so that they can start melting, we'll talk a little bit about supplies that are helpful if you want to get into crafting with beeswax. What kind of things might you need to find around your home or purchase possibly? And then next we'll address the question of what is beeswax? What exactly is it? How is it made? Which bees in the hive make it? Then we'll talk next about the harvesting process. So how do you harvest beeswax? How can you collect it? Where can you buy it? And then we'll talk about the melting and filtering process. So if you have beeswax, how do you render it to the point that it can be used for crafts? And then we'll talk about some general tips and tricks and safety things, and then we'll end with some Q&A. Well, let's craft. So today we're going to be making a hand cream recipe, and it's a hand and body cream, and I'll show you the recipe here. This is a similar one. It's not exactly what we're going to be making because, I'm going to turn this down a little bit. This recipe here is for a lemon mint hand and body cream, but we're going to be making a lavender one. So it's the exact same recipe, except instead of using the lemon and mint essential oils, we'll be using lavender. So this is the recipe that we'll be making today. So I know that this is probably maybe a little hard to read because the font's a little small up there, but the first step is that we need to get our beeswax, our almond oil, and our coconut oil melted in this double boiler. And I'll talk specifically about this very handmade double boiler in a second, but it works really well. So I have measured out 2 ounces of beeswax, and that's what this is. So it's 2 ounces by weight. I used a scale to measure this so that I got an exact amount, because it can be hard to measure it because it's a hard substance, so you can't necessarily put it in a cup. So I'm going to drop this in to the top of the double boiler, and it'll start to slowly and gently melt. And then my recipe calls for a cup of almond oil. So I'll add that in next. So here's my almond oil, and I purchased this at Natural Grocers, which is a store that's off of Milwaukee and Fairview. They have a lot of great stuff for beeswax crafting if any of you are interested in a local store. So I'm going to do a cup, and I'm measuring with a half cup, so I'm going to pour in 2 of these. Okay. Which health food store? Okay, perfect. So if any of you are from this side of the valley, then that might be a good place to go. Natural Grocers, and they said Ron's Health Food in Caldwell here. So I have a cup of the almond oil there, and now I'm going to add a half cup of coconut oil. And coconut oil is actually something you guys can get at Winco, Walmart. I've even seen it at Hobby Lobby, but health food stores will carry an all organic option if that's something that you'd like to purchase. Coconut oil is also relatively inexpensive, so it's a great way to create crafts. So I have these items in here, and it will start to melt as we continue on with the presentation. And I'm going to use a popsicle stick to stir it, because I can throw this popsicle stick away at the end when it's covered in wax. So I'm just going to let that start to melt as we continue on with our presentation. And then as these get melted, we'll continue on and add the other ingredients that are a part of the recipe. So let's talk about some helpful supplies. So if you're interested in beeswax crafting, what are some things that you might need in general for a variety of recipes? So one of the tools that I think is helpful to have is cake pans and cookie sheets. These are things you might have around the home. No need to go buy any, and if you don't have any, get some thrift store ones because they're going to get wax on them. Cookie pans can be really helpful for a couple of things. They can essentially serve as a drip tray so that when you're pouring, if anything spills, it'll land on the cookie sheet, which is easier to scrape off than maybe a countertop. But also what cookie sheets are really helpful for is a place to cool and harden melted wax. So if you're rendering and melting beeswax that you've harvested from a beehive and you want to cool it into a flat sheet that you can then break into pieces, putting in a cookie sheet, just spray it with some PAM and you can pour it in there, and the beeswax will actually harden and cool and shrink a little bit, and it'll be pretty easy to pop out. So it's good for a couple of things. Something I meant to mention at the beginning of this slide is you do not need to go out and buy nice stuff for this. Use the things around your house that you maybe aren't using for cooking or that you don't particularly care for, because what I recommend is that you use them just for beeswax crafting so that you're not mixing your pots and pans with stuff that you're then going to put food in, because wax being not water soluble is hard to totally clean off, and then there will be some residue that could get into the food that you're making. So I think it's helpful to use it just for beeswax crafting. So that's the cake pans and cookie sheets. Another thing that I think is helpful is a scale. So you can get really inexpensive scales if you don't have one already. This is one that I use for food as well. You can just put a piece of paper over it to weigh the food that you're trying to measure, but it has an ounces and a grams option, and it makes weighing beeswax really easy because, as I said earlier, it's hard to measure. Is this a half cup? Is this a quarter cup? Because it's a hard block. So a lot of recipes you'll find will ask for beeswax by weight and not by volume. A Pyrex measuring cup. So you can see here that I'm actually using a Pyrex measuring cup as the top of my double boiler, but you can also use it as a measuring cup to measure the other ingredients that you might be using for a wax project or for a beeswax project. I think that the Pyrex containers work really well because they can handle heat. They work really well to put in the oven, to put as a double boiler, and to have hot wax in. And so I made my double boiler this is an 8-cup Pyrex measuring cup or bowl that is in a slightly larger pot. And then I've used a wooden spoon to just help balance it so that it's not tipping. And the trick is to get your boiling water boiling but not flowing over, and I have made a little bit of a mess, but not too bad. But you want the water to be about 2/3 the way up your container so that the heat is all around it. So a Pyrex measuring cups can come in really handy. Oven mitts and pot holders, for obvious reasons, you're gonna be probably carrying some things that have some heat, and so protecting your hands and protecting your countertops is really important, so having some of those around. A cutting surface and some tools. So instead of trying to cut beeswax into chunks on your nice countertops, even just putting it on top of a piece of cardboard or something that can handle the pressure when you're cutting, or a cutting board that you have around the house. But having a cutting board to go over your counters is really helpful, as well as some tools to cut. So you can use knives to shave off pieces of beeswax or to cut it and score it so that you can break it. An X-Acto knife also works really well for this. A stirrer. So I like to use popsicle sticks or something similar to stir, because then I can throw it away at the end instead of using my nice wooden spoons that then will get beeswax on them. So this is a tool that I just buy a packet of them and use them for a lot of different crafts, but they're really great for this as well. A table cover and some paper towels. So I've put down, not a table cover, but I just am using an old paper bag from an outlet store to set down so that anything that's greasy will be on this and not on the countertop, which isn't a big deal if you can just wipe it off. But it's also really nice when I go to pour the beeswax, I can pour on top of this so that I'm not spilling beeswax on a counter that I then have to scrape off. However, it's inevitable that you will probably at some point spill a little bit of beeswax onto a counter, and so a paint scraper can be a really easy way to scuff that off without doing damage to the counter that it's on. So these are some helpful tools. But something I really want to point out again is that you don't need to buy nice stuff for crafting with beeswax. A double boiler that's handmade like this works just as well as two old pots that you don't really like that you stack up on one another. You don't need to go out to the store and buy a really nice double boiler to use for beeswax. So definitely get creative. That's what I love about beekeeping, is people get really inventive and can make a lot of homemade stuff for not a lot of money. So it's a good opportunity to think outside of the box and save a little bit of cash.